we're going to try to solve x squared plus 6x plus 7 equals 0. And the only way we know how to do that now is by graphing or by factoring. And if it's graphing and it's not on an integer, graphing isn't really good because you have to say between, or you get no solutions and you don't know what the imaginaries are, if there are imaginary solutions. If it doesn't factor using the monkey method, now we're in a world of trouble. If you try to factor this one, the only thing you can try is 7 and 1. And since it's positive 7, it's just not going to work to get 6. So this equation is not factorable. So now we're in a pickle because our two tried and true ways of doing this problem don't work. So we have to come up with other methods. Today we're going to learn completing the square. Okay? And there are steps to this process. So this is a longer problem. This isn't like last section where every problem was just short and you could fit all 28 examples we did on one piece of paper. This is going to be a longer process. Okay? Step 1 in the process is to move the constant to the other side. So we're going to subtract that 7 in this case to the other side. I'm going to list the steps over here on the left. Okay? Step 1, move the constant. So if you want to write those down so you can refer to them as we go through more examples, because I'm not writing the steps down every time. To have them, that might be a good idea. So we're going to move the constant to the other side. The positive 7 gets subtracted to the other side, becomes negative 7. Step 2 is not relevant in this particular problem, but it needs to be checked every time. In step 2, you would factor out the leading coefficient. The leading coefficient in this problem is 1. So we don't need to factor it out. We don't need to take it out. If it's not 1, you do need to factor it out. And you'll see that in the next example more clearly. But in this case, when it's 1, you don't need to do anything. Okay? Step 3. We are going to add half of the b term squared to both sides. Does anybody know what the b term is? What I'm even talking about there? 6x, and so b is just 6. Half the b term squared is painted on the wall over there under the air conditioner. So we're going to add half of b squared to both sides. Half of the b term squared is 9. And so we're going to add that to both sides. Whatever you do to one side, you have to do to the other. So we add 9 to the left, and we add 9 to the right. Each step in itself is minor. When you add it up, it's quite a few steps, and you get a big problem. That's why we're going slow, taking our time, making each step manageable. Step 4 is factor the left side, which in essence is the monkey method, but I'm going to give you a shortcut. The left side is going to factor into 2 parentheses, but both of them are going to be exactly the same. So knowing that both of them are going to be exactly the same, you should be able to do it in your head. Looking at the problem on the left side, x squared plus 6x plus 9, that's going to factor into what and what, if they're both exactly the same. X plus 3 and x plus 3, because the last two have to multiply to 9. So it's got to be 3 and 3. And since the nose and the mouth have to be positive 6, it will be plus and plus. Now when you write that, you're going to write it x plus 3 squared. Don't write 2 of them. Write it squared. That will help us. Okay? So you don't have to draw out the monkey and the nose and the mouth and the this and that. It's just going to be, you can do it in your head. It's basically the square root of this number. Is it plus or minus? Depends on that sign right there in front of the 6. Okay? Step 5, we're going to get the x by itself. We're going to solve for x. So we have to get rid of or move everything that's on the x side. Okay? So how do we get rid of a squared? How do you battle a square? Square root. So we're going to take the square root of both sides. Whenever you take the square root of a number, when you take the square root of both sides, you must put in a plus or minus. So it's going to be plus or minus root 2. The reason you took the square root of both sides is because the square and the square root neutralize each other, leaving you with just x plus 3 on that side. That's why you did it, to get rid of that square. And on the right, we have plus or minus root 2. The only thing left to get rid of the x is to subtract the 3 to the other side, and you get x equals negative 3 plus or minus root 2. Okay, so this one has a leading coefficient. Step 1, move the constant to the other side. 2x squared minus 8x equals negative 11. After each step, you should reassess what you're doing. Make sure you know what you're doing. It's not a race. Now we get to do step 2, which is factor out the leading coefficient. Even if it doesn't factor out nicely, you must factor it out. For example, if that 8 was an odd number, like 7, you still have to take out the 2, which would create a fraction. I get it, but you still have to do it. So we're going to take a 2 out of both terms on the left and put it out front. Okay? When we take out a 2, we're still going to leave it out front. When we take out a 2, we're left with x squared minus 4x inside. If we distributed the 2 back in, we would get right back to where we were, undistributing the problem. We have to do that. Because when you add in your half the b term squared, the only way it's going to work to do half the b term squared is if your x squared has a 1 coefficient in front of it. The only way you can do it. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to add half of the b term squared now to both sides. So looking at the b term, what is half of the b term squared? Half of the b term squared. 4. So I'm putting a 4 right there. Okay? Now, here's where you have to try to follow me, so everybody needs to listen. That 4 is not really a 4. It's in disguise. It's not really a 4. Does anybody know what it really is? It's really an 8. Are you confused? It's really an 8 because if you distributed this 2 through, you would see exactly what that 4 really is. Inside its little cocoon of a parentheses, you don't see the real number. But when you distribute that 2, it gets exposed for what it really is.
Why did we put it in the parentheses?
Because when you complete this, because you're going to factor that. So you want to keep it all together. You're going to factor it into 2 parentheses. So on the right side, we're going to add 8. You have to add on the right side what it really is. So in essence, adding this 4 here, we actually added 8 to this side. So you have to add 8 to this side. The completing the square process happens inside the parentheses. on the left side. That parentheses factors into two parentheses that are the same thing, which in this case would be x minus 2 squared, x minus 2, x minus 2, which with a little practice you'll get very good at that. And the right side is negative 3. And now our job is to get the x by itself. Step 1, divide by 2. I get x minus 2 squared equals negative 3 halves. I'm just doing my algebra skills right now. I'm not really doing anything fancy. Step 2, square root both sides. So up there on the top, I would take the square root of both sides, giving me x minus 2 is plus or minus negative root negative 3 halves. Add the 2 to the other side. I can't, at this point, we don't know how to simplify a fraction under a root very well. That comes in next chapter. The only thing we know how to do is get that negative out of a root. And to get a negative out of a root, you just put an I out front. So I would expect you to do that. So the answer that I would expect you to write, 2 plus or minus I root positive 3 halves.